I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and joining us for this Mixed Methods webinar brought to you jointly by Mixed Methods International Research Association as well as the International Institute for Qualitative Methodology. Today we're going to hear from Dr. Michael Fetters. Dr. Michael Fetters serves as Professor of Family Medicine of UM, Director of Japanese Family Health Program of University of Michigan, and co-editor of the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. His qualitative and mixed methods research interests focus on methodology, particularly on research design, integration, research proposal development, and use of mixed methods research in cross-cultural studies. Dr. Fetters has led multiple funded mixed methods investigations and evaluations and provided multiple workshops internationally. His research content focuses on the influence of culture on medical decision-making, bioethics, and health services research in primary care. In 2015, he co-funded with John W. Creswell the Michigan Mixed Methods Research and Scholarship Program. We're very happy to have Dr. Fetters teaching or giving this webinar today. So, Dr. Fetters, you can go ahead and begin.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining. Okay? You okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.
So,
everyone here, try this in rehearsal and everyone else. I'm not sure we're ready to go. So I had three objectives for our webinar today: to understand the overall paper submission process, to understand skills needed to compose a compelling empirical mixed methods study, and I'll explain that momentarily, and understand skills needed to compose a compelling methodological mixed methods paper as well. So we'll go from there. And I'm assuming we have some time for questions at the end, so I'll go through this and to mention that I am an editor with the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. Our most recent impact factor is 1.927, and we're in the social sciences interdisciplinary category, which is 8 out of 83 journals in that category. I would like to mention that most of what I'll be talking about today, or a good part of it, is also published in a relatively recent editorial that I led with previous co-editor Don Freshwater in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. So there are 5 general steps that I want to talk about when you're successfully publishing an article. First of all, you have to identify possible journals, and I'm going to really emphasize selecting 3 from the get-go, tailoring your paper to the journal, composing the paper itself, then submitting it, dealing with rejection decisively. Hopefully if that won't happen, but if it does, you need to be prepared. And next is responding to reviews. So we're going to cover those features. There's obviously lots of details to all of these things, and we'll be going with relatively broad strokes, but hopefully this will be interesting for you. So there are some tricks to identifying possible journals for your submission. What journals are publishing the papers that you're citing? What journals are actually citing the papers that are similar to yours? What kind of expertise do you see on the editorial board? And does the journal publish articles like yours? And a real easy place to look for that is in the table of contents of the actual journal itself. And that will help you better understand what is the overall audience of the journal, because you need to write to the audience of the journal. You're going to want to look at the specific article categories and see how they're going to accommodate your paper. What is the fit of your potential paper with them, including both the format as well as the word count. And also you're going to want to look at how the journal is published. Is it paper or online or both? And there's some real important issues to consider relative to online publishing these days. And also, what is the option for multiple manuscripts? So with a mixed method study, you might have several papers that you want to publish, and there may be an option for publishing a couple at the same time. And they have some exclusive submission rules that you need to follow. It is possible always to contact or network with the editors, though I would say as a rule, most editors want you to read the instructions to authors before you contact them. I did want to make, I wanted to share with you some information about a website called Jane. You may or may not be familiar with it, but it's called the Journal Author Name Estimator. And what this journal does, when you go to this link, if you just type in Jane, it pops up. And you can type in your abstract. I did this for a paper that we're actually working on at the time. And then after you type this in, you can click either Find Journals or Find Authors. And I'm going to give you an example of what I push to get Find Journals. What you get when you do that is this long list. This is a box that popped up, so for brevity I included this. But if you click on one of these links, then it will actually give you illustration of articles that were thought to be similar to your own paper that you could potentially submit to, and the actual titles within that journal. So that's a nice resource. You can also use the Find Authors function right here if you are required to submit potential reviewers for your paper. That's increasingly common. So what I really want to emphasize today is that it is a real process of selecting where you want to submit your journal, and I'm going to encourage you to select at least 3 target journals to start with. One is your stretch journal, which I would consider a very top tier journal, which is probably hard to get an acceptance in, maybe somewhere between 10 or 30%. Next level would be what I call a good fit journal. This would be a good journal, a very strong journal, maybe a little bit less hard to get in, but you still feel as though your chance of getting in is maybe only 50-50. And of course, your safety journal. This would be a lower ranking journal, perhaps least hard for an acceptance, and you think you have a very good chance of probability. And what I can't emphasize enough, I've been through this with so many junior researchers, is you put a lot of sweat equity into a paper, you send it out, and you get back a rejection, and then you go crawl in the corner and you kind of mope about it, and you have lots of tears, and 3 months later, 6 months later, you're still trying to figure out where you're going to go to next. So it's really nice to figure this out from the get-go so you know where you're going to go, to minimize the emotion of rejection, and to give you a clear plan in terms of next steps. And I always like to say, if you never submit to top tier journals, you will never publish in top tier journals. So if you're using this strategy, you should expect that you're going to be rejected sometimes, because you're always reaching high. Now, if you're in a situation where you need to be quickly published, maybe you've got a grant proposal going in and you really would like to see a paper in print before you go, you might be a little bit more comfortable going with one of your safety journals just to get the paper published relatively quickly. This is just a list of some journals that I'm aware of that publish methodological papers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And in my field, empirical papers relative to family medicine, primary care, general medicine. Really, it's critical for you to tailor your paper to the journal, and you're going to need to frame for the readership. You're going to want to format your journal to specification and study the structure of articles. I can't tell you how many papers we get that don't follow the instructions. As an editor, it's very hard to take a paper seriously if someone hasn't carefully followed the instructions to authors. We have those there for a reason. And if you're not following them, it really sends a red flag to us as editors. Next, you're going to want to compose your article. You obviously need to have a lead person. You're going to want to communicate who that's going to be up front. Oftentimes, mixed methods research projects are conducted as teams. And so you're going to need one person who's really looking after the prose. Again, following the journal specifications. And I really want to emphasize this point of attending to the structure that's recommended in the journal. If you're more junior in your career, it is really important to find out up front who's going to be expected to be an author on the paper. And also, you want to give those people an opportunity to participate. I've seen cases where someone basically works through the entire paper themselves, and then it comes time to basically submit, and then they're sort of wringing their hands about whether or not they should include another author or not, who's relatively senior or was in the lab, but that person hasn't really contributed anything, but they also haven't had any chance to contribute. So by involving people up front, you can find out whether or not someone contributes. And I think when you make that offer, you can say, we'd like to include you as an author, but the issue is, if you don't make an active contribution, then it's going to be hard to submit your name. It's expected that you're going to contribute appropriately. And probably all of you are familiar with guidelines, the ethical guidelines for submission of manuscripts, which I won't go into. Make sure that you have an English and a grammar check, assuming you're published in English or in the language that you're publishing in. This is also a red flag for reviewers. Reviewers get very frustrated if you have not written your prose well. So, if you are not a native English speaker yourself, then at minimum, you really need to have someone who will read the paper very carefully to make sure they understand the English. So when you submit, you're going to want to have a nice brief cover letter. You want to make sure you have all your documents ready to go, especially if you're submitting online. If you're required to, you'll need to de-identify or blind your paper. That's the most common process. And once you have actually submitted all of the information, you're going to want to check that your submission was actually received online and is ready to go out for peer review. Now, if you have gone for a stretch journal and you only had about a 10% chance of getting in, the odds are that at some point you're going to get a rejection. If you do, go to the next journal on your list immediately. If it was reviewed and there's some easy changes or corrections, you should go ahead and make those. But my belief is that you put a lot of work in it, and if they're suggesting substantive changes, I would pursue those only if you really perceive those as absolutely critical for the paper, and then hit the resubmit button. It's actually kind of uncanny. This is the philosophy that I've sort of carried around for a number of years, and about 5 years ago I was at a meeting where the keynote speaker actually said almost exactly the same thing about this process. So it's been independently corroborated. Now, when it comes time to resubmit, go back and review your list of these 3 target journals, your stretch journal, your good fit journal, your safety journal. Presumably you're down in this territory here, and just make sure, again, maybe there was something about the response of the reviews where you felt, maybe that you were in the wrong genre of journal, that you might need to try something different from what you had originally considered. You might have gotten feedback from the reviewers that they thought your article would be a better fit, say in some other field that you really hadn't emphasized before. But you have this and you should go right to it. Now, let's hope that you got a request to respond to the reviewers. And this is a point I would really like to emphasize. Before going through and starting to change your manuscript, go ahead and just develop a draft response letter first. What this does is it really helps you develop out your revision strategy. So if you go through, point by point, and you say, this is how, we fix the manuscript, this is something that you can circulate to your co-authors and make sure that everyone is in agreement about the strategy for the revision. The worst thing to do would be to go through and start making revisions, and then one of your co-authors say, hey, we really don't like this, we want to do something different, or we don't like that. So you literally want to get everyone on the same page, and the way to do that is to develop your draft response letter first. And that's also very helpful, especially for identifying if you have specific expertise that needs to be added by one of the other members on the team. You can even target and say, Dr. Jones, I really need you to work on this particular section. And so you can assign responsibility. Then you actually need to rewrite your manuscript. It is really critical that you respond to all of the editor comments for sure. You should address all the comments that you can, but if you get specific comments from the editor, you need to make sure that you address those fully. In the end, you don't have to accept all of the comments that are made. I've actually had several manuscripts where I was asked to make changes that were blatantly bad changes. And so I had to respond to the editors and reviewers that what I was being asked to do was methodologically not appropriate. But you do want to use the reviewer comments to make the manuscript better. And so using some kind of phrasing like based on the review process, we feel the manuscript is much better. This is kind of what the editors are expecting, even if you don't address every single comment that your reviewers have made. And you know, if you've gone very far, I'm sure some of you, if not perhaps all of you, have gotten back reviews where the reviews seem to contradict one another. Some journals, like the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, likes for you to highlight changes in your revision. I think this is actually in your best interest to do this, and partly it's because when you send your manuscript back, oftentimes it's going to go to the same reviewers. And by highlighting your changes, what that does is it brings their attention to the specific things that they asked you to fix. It makes it easier for them to see if you've complied with their suggestions, and makes it easy for them to see if they feel as though they're satisfactory. But it also, at some level, places the emphasis on those areas, and the reviewers may not be scrutinizing the rest of the manuscript as closely. So what that means is if you send a totally, completely clear document, the reviewers may be looking at it again, skin to skin, and identify a number of other things that they didn't really recognize in the first place. Now, before you actually submit your revised paper and your letter with your point-by-point response, you really need to go back and make sure that what you said you were going to do in your letter up here, because you drafted this response letter first, you have to make sure that you actually have those changes in your revision. And it's a really good idea to identify where they are in the manuscript. Oftentimes manuscripts will come back with numbering, and so you can refer to the exact number if they're consecutive numbers in a PDF. Or you can also use a format where you say in the methods, the third paragraph, the fourth sentence, we've responded as thus, and then you can give the example. I would say it's really important to submit within your deadline. If you feel as though you're going to go past that, it really is good form to be in touch with the editors, the editorial office, and let them know. So there are actually several formats that can be utilized in a response letter when you're writing back. Again, it's very important to have all points covered that were raised by the editors and the reviewers. And those three formats are called a synthesized narrative, a line-by-line narrative, or a table format. And I'm going to give you examples of each of those. So, I'm sorry, I'm going to start actually with the cover letter. So this is just a very brief cover letter saying, you know, dear Dr. Smith, actually this is my case, it would be Dr. Fetters. Thank you for the thoughtful review. We've taken the reviewer's comments into consideration and revised the manuscript accordingly. We've highlighted the major changes. Please find a point-by-point listing of the reviewer current concerns and responses. And then end on a positive note. This would be a good place to say that, you know, based on the review process, we think the paper is much stronger. So that gives you a little draft that you can use if you don't have something already. And then these are the three types of responses that you might actually see when you're going back with your revision. So a synthesized narrative basically is looking across all of the reviews that you get back. So this would be specific points from the editors, responses from reviewer 1, 2, and 3. Let's assume that you had 3 reviewers. And then you say that those 3 reviews all included this point about wanting greater clarity about, for example, the mixed methods purpose statement. So you're basically summarizing or synthesizing comments that were across the board similar. And then here you would write then your response to that piece. So this would be another example. Perhaps this is editor and reviewer 3, and they talk about a purpose statement. You can say, when it's been done above, that we've done this. And then the issue reviewer 2 suggested restructuring the paper. So you get the idea that this is really a synthesis of several reviewers and perhaps statements from the editors. This can also be helpful if you're getting a lot of conflicting statements. So you might say reviewer 1 has suggested that we take the manuscript in this direction, whereas reviewer 2 suggests that we take the manuscript in the opposite direction. When that occurs, this is a way that you can really justify the direction that you actually went with your review. Sorry, I've got a little background noise here in my office. I hope that's not making it hard for you to hear. This is just what we would call a line-by-line narrative. So this would be comments from reviewer number 1. So the study is very interesting, well organized. The diagrams of research are fine. A lot of times a review just has a comment in it. You just say thank you, no changes. And then they might say, the convergent mixed method research design is not a strong design and even controversial. They should use something different. You don't actually have to agree with that. So this is a response. This may be the case, but convergent designs are appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So this is basically just a line by line, and it is very helpful to use italics or spacing or underlining, or you can put quotations around the specific comments from the reviewers, just to really help keep it separated. What's the reviewer? What is your response? I hope that's clear. So we talked about synthesized response. We talked about a line-by-line response. Another response is actually the table format. This is getting increasingly popular. And the idea is that you place in the left column whatever concern was raised by, say, the editors or by the reviewer, and this would extend through reviewer 2, reviewer 3, and then you can write your response here. This is a really nice format for the editor and also the reviewers to see that you're actually following along, really taking very seriously every single point that was raised, and that you're addressing it as requested. So now we're going to talk about the actual writing process, the composing process. I just want to say that the focus of the Journal of Mixed Methods Research is on publishing methodological articles. And we basically have two types: theoretical articles. These are conceptual articles on timely topics and mixed methods. And then we also have another category of empirical articles, which are reporting on the content of specific studies. So this could be in business, education, family medicine, nursing, sociology, education, again, is huge. So these are the two types of articles we publish, but a really key point that I want to emphasize is that all of our articles have to have a methodological aim. And this is one of the most important reasons for a desk rejection at our journal, is that the authors have not composed a specific methodological aim, or their methodological aim is really not one that's very novel. So we're looking for novel methodological papers. We also have media reviews, books, softwares, software that has come out. And that's actually a very popular feature, especially among people that are newer to the field that are looking for specific resources. I would say that all well-written mixed methods articles have some features in common. They're all persuasively identifying relevant literature, identifying a gap in the field, following appropriate structure, extensively using headers and subheaders. This is particularly an area that I think is important for mixed methods research papers because they are very complex. You're basically doing a lot more work when you're collecting both qualitative and quantitative data. You need to speak to the audience that the journal is serving. In the case of the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, it's an extremely diverse audience. And then this is another point I really want to emphasize, is that when you're writing an article, you need to write for the understanding of the reader and not for the ego of the author. All too often I see papers where you really get the sense that the author is just trying to prove that they're a scholar in the field, and they're writing in language that is not going to be accessible to the reader. And that really doesn't get you anywhere. And that might be important, if you're in a very narrowly focused journal, but for a general audience or multidisciplinary audience like the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, the specific content that you're writing about needs to be understandable by a wide spectrum of scholars. Now, if you're working on a methodological / theoretical article, this is basically writing a persuasive essay, and when you do this, you want to state your problem very quickly and clearly. You want to state a clear purpose, and you want to argue or illustrate somewhere between 3 and 5 points in exactly the order that you said you would. Write them in that order. You want to use very good illustrative, persuasive examples, and then discuss limitations about what you have said. So I would say that probably writing methodological articles might be new to many of you. They can be very rewarding. Methodological articles tend to be cited much more than content-specific articles, specifically because the methods can be applied in multiple disciplines. And so that's really good for your promotion and recognition academically. So that's one of the compelling reasons to write a methodological paper. Sorry, I missed one. You're going to want to discuss what future implications are, areas that might be ripe for using the specific methodological procedure that you're developing, or how this might change thinking about, how it might change thinking in the field. Now we're going to talk about empirical articles. So this is probably the bulk of mixed methods articles that are written. So these are articles that are just trying to demonstrate an empirical point. So you need to provide a good rationale for the importance of the content that you're addressing in your own field. You need to rigorously collect both quantitative and qualitative data. You're going to want to make it very clear that there's explicit integration at the design, methods, interpretation, and reporting levels. And you want to suggest implications for your content field and possibly for the field of mixed methods research. At the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, the implications for the field are prerequisite. So when you're writing your empirical article, you want to review previous topic-specific literature. And if you're looking for specific methodological articles, you might want to look at the Journal of Mixed Methods Research website, which has a listing of the top published articles. You're going to want to provide a persuasive rationale as to why a mixed methods study is needed. So one type of data, perhaps a qualitative study, is insufficient, or a large survey wouldn't really give you the granularity that you're looking for. You have a need to explain results that you obtained. You need to explore some ideas before exploring them, say through survey methodology. So you might start with a qualitative study first and explore it, and then conduct a survey in a larger population subsequently. Or you may have a sense of a need to augment one database with another type of data, recognizing that all data collection procedures have limitations. At the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, we essentially require some type of figure of your methodology. And I think this is actually very helpful for any kind of empirical paper that you might be publishing, because mixed method studies are complicated. And you often hear a picture is worth 1,000 words. So a well-written figure actually tells a lot to the reader. And again, if you go back to the idea that you're writing for the understanding of the reader, you're going to want to use whatever tools you have at your discretion to make this effective. In your title and abstract, it's a good idea to use the words mixed methods. And we actually prefer creating neutral titles that do not tip or suggest that the qual or quantitative is more important. It may be that that's okay. For example, if you're doing a randomized controlled trial with supplemental qualitative data, it would be important to emphasize that you were doing a title. In your abstract, it's going to be very important that you address your mixed methods design and integration approaches. Now, in your background, it's going to be very important to have a clear statement of your problem. What are the reasons actually for using mixed methods research? And often this is by looking at some sort of gap or deficiency in previous research. You want to write a good mixed methods purpose statement. And so you want that to include both the general intent of the quantitative and qualitative strands relative to the data collection and analysis, the specific reason for mixing those two types of data, and then how the mixing actually occurred in the study. So was there some building of a new instrument based on initial qualitative work? Was there explanations of findings from a large-scale survey that you were looking at? And if you have specific research questions, you should state those. Usually quantitative are stated as hypotheses, whereas qualitative are appropriately stated as questions. And your mixed methods questions would be also questions as opposed to hypotheses. In your methods section, you're going to have specific information about the type of design that you use and reference recent mixed methods literature. For both your quantitative and qualitative methods, you want to include detailed descriptions of your specific methods. So, for example, you might say that you did a correlational study and you also did a grounded theory study. We strongly encourage the use of visuals, some kind of table or matrix. Now, this is really important, talking about integration at the design level. I actually included here 5 different advanced frameworks, but there are 3 basic designs. Probably many of you know what these are already, but an exploratory sequential design where qualitative data are collected initially, and that's followed up by quantitative data collection. In an explanatory design, the qualitative data follow initial quantitative assessment, and in a convergent design, you're collecting both at the same time. A multi-stage advanced framework is really just stating that you're using a combination of these in a single line of study. An intervention type of framework is specifically doing some type of trial. Case study mixed methods research is, again, where you're looking at a specific case and defining the case. Participatory designs are increasingly common in the health sciences. This might include things like community-based participatory research or transformative designs. Increasingly popular is also instrument or an app development design, and there are some specifics to those as well. Another category that's getting increasing recognition is also just evaluation designs, where you're using multiple data collection procedures and integrating those results. If you're interested, further information can also be seen in this paper that I published along with Leslie Curry and John Creswell in the journal called Health Services Research. So this might be interesting to some of you. There's some new language here in terms of data integration during the actual data collection. Connecting is referring to when one database links to the other through sampling. So this is where you're collecting your qualitative and your quantitative data, and there's a data collection linkage as the samples are similar. Building is when one database is informing data collection of the other. A classic approach would be an initial qualitative study where you're identifying important domains, developing ideas for scales, developing language for those scales, and then subsequently building an instrument from that. Matching is this idea that it commonly occurs, especially in a convergent design, where both data collection approaches are targeting data collection about similar domains. So for example, you might have an instrument on depression where you're measuring someone's score on depression, and simultaneously you might be conducting qualitative interviews about what it's like to live with depression. So in that sense, you're matching your data collection procedures. Embedding is typically used to describe how qualitative data collection is being added into a trial at multiple points before the trial, during the trial, or after the trial. So this is integration through data collection procedures. And these are all areas that you should write about clearly in your methods section. Results. You may want to report your quantitative and qualitative results separately. If you do so, you want to make sure that they're consistent with the flow of your design and the priority givens. So it's, again, reflecting the type of design, and use figures, tables, matrices to summarize your results. These are often called a joint display. And then when you're actually reporting your results in your results section, there are really two approaches. One is what we call a weaving approach, where you're writing both the qualitative and quantitative findings together on a theme by theme or concept by concept basis, so that you speak to the qualitative findings about depression and the quantitative findings about depression. The contiguous approach is where all of the qualitative findings are presented in one section, and then the quantitative findings are presented in a separate section. So it's very different in terms of not, having the qualitative and quantitative data on the same topic together. It's really just sort of putting the entire qualitative study out there, and then the quantitative study, and then maybe having some sort of integration after that. Another possibility is actually staged publication, where you might have a series of papers, a qualitative paper, a quantitative paper, and then even a third mixed methods paper. This is a statement that I really want to emphasize as important. This really changed my thinking a lot. The discussion is the hardest part of the paper to write. And a really valuable way to think about writing the discussion is, before this research, we thought this. Now, because of this research, we think, why. So we used to think that this is the way it worked around palliative care at the end of life with, ethnic minority groups. We now know that there's something really different going on. It's important to note that the discussion is not a place to regurgitate your findings. That's for your results section. Again, you're going to want to mirror the flow in terms of how you're presenting, and you're going to want to discuss any limitations that came up and talk about future research. So how do you organize the sections when you're actually writing? A lot of people think that you go in this order: the introduction, methods, results, discussion. I actually advise following this formula, where you start with writing your methods. This is what you did. This is what you can write about as you're actually doing the research. Then write about your results. Then work in parallel on the introduction and discussion. And this goes back to the statement that I just mentioned. Before this research, we thought this was the case. Now, based on this research, we now believe this. So this is how you set that up in the introduction and the discussion, and you can work on that in parallel. Finally, you're going to want to revise your title. You may have started out with a title that you submitted on an abstract, and you want to change that to reflect the new findings of the paper. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Hourglass model of design. This is emphasized quite heavily in the editorial that I introduced that's in the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. Generally, there's sort of this wider top part of an hourglass. And this is where you're first talking about what is the broadest context, what is then a more field-specific or a more narrow context, and then what are your specific methodological and empirical objectives. Sorry, this is a little out of order. I'll just put the whole thing up. So when you're thinking about this structure, one thing I want to draw your attention to is what is your total word count. So if you think about it, you're going to have about a 1, I'm sorry, this should be a 1, 1, 2, 1 ratio. So that your introduction is going to be relatively shorter, your method's relatively shorter. You want the bulk of your findings in the results. And so as you're working on these sections, it's very helpful to actually think about what are your word counts. So a lot of people really get paralyzed when they're working on a particular section. It feels like there's just this overwhelming amount of literature, especially when you're writing the background. And really the bottom line is you only have about 500 words. Now, if you've ever submitted an abstract somewhere, that's about 2 paragraphs. You know, a whole abstract is usually 250 words. So it's 2 long paragraphs. If you push it up to, say, 750 words, you're still only talking about maybe 3 or 4 paragraphs at the most. So I encourage people to think about, hey, I only got to write 1 paragraph about the broader context, and I don't have a lot of room to go into details. Similarly, on your methods, you're really going to have to be very concise with what you're writing, remembering that you have these limitations because of total word count. So this is based on an assumption of about a 2,500 word count, which is common in the health sciences. So this is where you can think about word counts and language structure. Coming back to the hourglass, we talked about how you want to start out with what's your broadest context, focusing then on your more field-specific context, and then setting up your objectives, and then really going through your design, basically in the order that you went into it. And this is going to vary depending on, you know, what specific time of mixed methods design you had. Then you're going to have your primary findings, usually in the importance. There'll usually be somewhere between 3 to 5 paragraphs here about your study finding. And then this is going to be in your discussion where you might have further details about your integrated findings, talking about field-specific implications and broader implications. And not surprisingly, abstract is going to follow a similar structure. So again, in terms of an overall proportion, the greatest amount of your wording ought to be in your results section. And this is based on a 250 word count abstract. This is just emphasizing, it's basically the same diagram with a little bit more details about the specifics of each component. And each of these arrows is really designed to suggest what would be 1 paragraph. So again, you're going to have a whole series of short paragraphs in your method section, and maybe slightly longer paragraphs in your results section. You're going to have see some variations in terms of how you actually write the methods section of your paper. So if you're doing an explanatory, sequential, or a quantitatively driven convergent design, you're going to have your quantitative pieces coming first and your qualitative coming second. You're always going to want to mention your mixed methods integration. For an exploratory project, focusing on the qualitative first, then talking about the quantitative and the mixed methods integration. Again, we're focusing just on the methods section at this point. Now, there is a possibility for some efficiencies when you get into a convergent mixed methods design because your sampling may be quite similar. So that's where, again, you may not have to write about each one of these pieces separately. I just mostly wanted to emphasize here that when you do a methodological empirical study, that if you want to submit it to the Journal of Mixed Methods Research, we don't need all of your results. We really just need to see sufficient amount of information to illustrate your methodology. And this can be nice if you're trying to publish a paper early on. Now, in a contiguous approach, you might publish first your qualitative findings, your quantitative findings, and then have your mixed methods findings separately. Another approach is called weaving, and this is the theme-by-theme presentation, again, where you would speak to both your qualitative and quantitative findings. And again, if you did your quantitative first, it may make more sense to have the quantitative and the qualitative there. So this is just illustrating again those variations. This is starting with your broader context, identifying topic-specific content, what are your specific objectives. In your discussion, based on this research, we now know this. We didn't know this before the study. And ideally, you'll emphasize what I call the integration challenge, which is how collecting one type of data, the qualitative, plus another type of quantitative data, actually leads to a whole greater than the sum of the individual parts. And that's going to come out in your discussion section. There is an opportunity, we're running out of time, but there's stage publication as a possibility. I'm not going to go into that at this point. I did want to encourage you to choose your target journals thoughtfully, and also when you're going through that process, if you want to aim high, to really think about a stretch journal, a good fit journal, and sort of a safety net journal. Make sure that you're always matching your writing structure to the paper type. And I would also encourage all of you to review and submit to the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. I wanted to briefly mention that our Mixed Methods Research and Scholarship Program at the University of Michigan is doing workshops, and we have one actually coming up this week on writing your mixed methods paper for publication. We're doing workshops about 3 times a year. Also, I would also invite you to consider joining the Mixed Methods International Research Association. There was regional conferences, and then there's also the international conferences coming up in August in Durham, England. So on that note, I would be happy to take any questions. We have maybe a few minutes, and again, I'm sorry for the late start. We had some technological challenges.
Problem. Thank you very much, Michael. That was a great presentation. If anyone does have questions, you can raise your hand and I can give you the microphone. If you don't have a microphone, you can write your questions in the bottom and we can read them out. So we do have people asking about sharing your slides. Michael, if you're willing to do that.
I may have to go back. Ties them a little bit. If there's any material.
Sure.
I'll send them to you then.
Sounds good. Okay, if there are any other presentations, you can write them in the bottom or raise your hand. We have about 1 minute left. In the meantime, I will mention that IIQM registration is open for the Qualitative Health Research Conference taking place in Kelowna, October 15th to 19th. So you can go to the website iiqm.ualberta.ca to get more information and to register for that. Okay, so I'm not seeing any raised hands here.
Again, encourage people to consider looking at our editorial. So this is actually this paper is the best to journal like economics subject journal. So for example, and what's really important is the methodological journal you illustrate the innovative and methodological. These new methodologies are developing like crazy right now. So really encourage you to consider developing methodological. You're basically just study and you're pretty much following rules and standard procedures. You probably don't have an influence. methodological contribution to make. If you're doing something that unique, you haven't been able to find anything in the literature about it, then that would be a good hint that you ought to consider a methodological paper. The other thing that I would really encourage you to think about is taking very detailed notes and keeping good records of your methodology. You know, you often hear the devil's in the details. And so, you know, when you're writing a methodological paper, you need to know the details of, you know, exactly what you did. The other thing that I would say, you know, regardless of whether you're doing a content-specific paper or a methodological paper, is to start writing your methods first. So, you know, I know I talked about a lot of material, so I hope this point wasn't lost, but I encourage people to write from their methods. So write your methods first, develop your tables, develop your result sections, and then very last, write your introduction and discussion in parallel. So what that means is that you can start writing your methods actually as you're doing your project, and it's actually ideal for you to write your methods as you're doing the project. Don't wait for the whole project to be over and then start writing up, you know, say, okay, I've done the whole project, now it's time for me to start writing. Not the way to go.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's, don't see any questions, and we're out of time, so I think that's it for today. So Dr. Fetters, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. Once we get an edited version of the PowerPoint slides, it will be posted on the website along with the recording. So you can go to iiqm.ualberta.ca under the webinars tab, and you can see the recording. It should be up by next week. Thank you all for coming. The next mixed methods presentation, I believe we don't have one until September. And that will be Natalia Ivankova, Teaching and Learning Mixed Methods Research. And that will be September 13th at 1:00 p.m. So you can look for the registration for that in early September. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Michael. Bye.